Does death deter? Our government kills people. Why? One of the most common arguments in support of a death penalty is that it serves as a deterrent to crime in a way that less severe punishments like imprisonment do not. In order to shed light on the morality of a death penalty, then, its societal effects must be well understood. According to death penalty apologist Ernest Vandenhoek, we threaten punishments in order to deter crime. We impose them not only to make those threats credible, but also as retribution for the crimes that were not deterred. Between these justifications of deterrence and retribution, only one can be a matter of empirical fact. Therefore, in order to investigate common moral arguments about capital punishment, it makes sense to begin by examining how effectively the threat of death deters the crimes it is used to punish. There has been significant body of research into capital punishment as a deterrent to crime, presumably for the same reason I'm talking about it here. It is an important starting point to the death penalty debate. One of the most common investigative techniques is to compare homicide rates with legal sanctions of the time and place. In other words, does the amount of relevant crime change if the use of the death penalty changes? This strategy brings a general struggle of political science to light, that there is no control group for nations. We are just unable to know for sure if the changes in the murder rate were caused by the death penalty or if separate variables were at play. For this reason, there's no widespread consensus about how the research addresses this question. This lack of certainty is noted by many scholars, including John Donahue and Justin Wolfers in the Stanford Law Review. Researchers from Northwestern and the University of Virginia conducted a study in 2012 that aimed to understand the widely varying evidence in this topic. They found that the results about the deterring effect of the death penalty depend heavily on certain assumptions about the statistics at hand. Some examples of these assumptions are the consistency of the deterrent effect, the role of outside factors on crime rates, and how quickly a deterrent effect would start after implementation of death penalty laws. They found that the weaker the assumptions are, the more ambiguous and unclear the results. If they assume things strongly, they can show both that the death penalty increases homicide or deters it. Essentially, statistical analysis is unable to provide conclusive evidence about the death penalty's deterrent effect unless everyone can agree about these various assumptions. Unsurprisingly, they don't. These researchers are not the only ones to come to this conclusion. Noted death penalty advocate Ernest Vandenhoek concedes that, quote, despite much recent work, there has been no conclusive statistical demonstration that the death penalty is a better deterrent than alternative punishments, end quote. However, the case for deterrence does not stop there. We will continue by examining the argument that common sense alone is enough to show that the death penalty is a deterrent and responses to that argument. While many supporters of capital punishment agree the deterrent effect of the death penalty has not been proven statistically, they would argue that it also hasn't been proven not to have an effect. The results are mixed. The next best step is to examine the issue using reason and common sense, which many advocates believe provides sufficient justification. Vandenhoek and other death penalty advocates would argue that we can find examples of risk deterring certain behaviors all around us. The risk of bodily or legal harm deters people from speeding or running a red light. The risk of excessive weight gain and illness deter people from eating solely junk food. They may also assert that as the risk increases, so does the magnitude of its deterrent effect. People who know that speeding fines and fatality rates increase at extremely high speeds may be deterred from driving recklessly, but on the other hand could be willing to take on the risk of a lesser fine by exceeding the speed limit by just 5 or 10 miles per hour. Logically, they argue it should follow that would-be criminals are more strongly deterred from committing crimes that carry harsher punishments. As almost all death row inmates would prefer a life sentence to a death sentence, why shouldn't it be believed that death will deter to a larger degree? Now, Jeffrey Ryman responds to such arguments. He first asserts that if this line of reasoning is to be trusted, why not institute death by torture? Surely, criminals would be more fearful of that than of being killed painlessly. But either way, he and other death penalty opponents argue that even if the death penalty is more feared than alternative punishments, that does not necessitate greater deterrence. Life in prison may be a harsh enough consequence to deter anyone who can be deterred by threat of punishment. Those who would be willing to take on the potential of life in prison likely believe the risk of suffering the punishment is sufficiently low enough to commit the crime. Changing what they view as a sufficiently low and small risk of lifelong imprisonment to an equal risk of death may not cross a threshold that changes behavior, especially when considering that most crimes that would carry the death penalty are generally motivated by powerful emotion. It is likely not a meticulous cost-benefit analysis as someone might undertake before committing something like fraud. Additionally, significantly more felons are killed by police in the line of duty than by the judicial system after conviction. Criminals are shown to take on this risk of death, so why would the risk of capital punishment be any different? If you're unconvinced by a direct cost-benefit level argument for deterrence, consider this. Vandenhag also suggests that the death penalty can deter by ingraining society's view of murder into its population. By killing people who commit murder, we are saying that it is a crime which rids people of their human right to life. When this is internalized, people may be deterred by the social and moral implications instilled through the use of capital punishment. Now, our response to this argument would be that by choosing not to kill people for crimes, we would likewise be instilling a taboo against murder by sparing even our most heinous criminals. This could potentially deter just as well or even better. At this point, the most prominent arguments surrounding capital punishment as a deterrent to crime from both perspectives have been laid out. We first looked into the quantitative research, then examined the argument that it will affect the cost-benefit considerations of would-be criminals. After that, we examined the potential for deterrence by simply existing in a society with or without the death penalty. The next step in looking for death penalty justification are arguments surrounding retribution. A most basic explanation of this is that criminals deserve punishment for disrupting social order. But there is significant nuance to the arguments and dialogue that we just don't have time for here. However, the way we deal with the most harmful among us can say a lot about our cultural values. And I'd argue that it's important to further explore arguments about what our best options are.